You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Welcome back to Modern Musicology. My name is R. Alan Seiler, and guess who's here? It's Rob Levy.
Hello, sir. How are you?
Great. How are you?
Hanging in there. It's good to see you.
Oh, you as well. So we were planning to be back a week from now with new episodes, but Rob and I thought we would just jump on really quickly and do kind of a little bonus episode to talk about this brand new documentary about Saturday Night Live. And we're going to get into that in just a second. But first, I've got some listener feedback that I want to share from our two most recent episodes. The first one is about our Robin Hitchcock episode. We heard from Tammy Faye Starlight, who is a friend of Stephanie's. And she said that the show was awesome. The interview with Robin Hitchcock was awesome. And our very good friend, Teresa Kiriakis, who you may know as the punk rock photographer, we've had her on our show and interviewed her once before, a couple of years ago. And she's remained a good friend of the show. And she said that both the book and the album are great. And that's the Robin Hitchcock book and album that we talked about in our interview with Robin. About our last episode on Bowie covers, we got some really great feedback on that one. A guy named Harry Huzzy from Ireland wanted to say, first off, when Anthony spoke of a song almost being a de facto cover of Fame, my mind immediately went to this James Brown song, released several months after Fame was a big hit. To be fair, I think Carlos Alomar had been in Brown's band at some point, maybe even being involved in this recording also. Either way, it's definitely the famous riff. The song he's talking about is called Hot, and it came out, so Fame was recorded, I don't remember the dates, but Fame was recorded early in 75, came out mid 75, and about 3 months after Fame came out, James Brown recorded this song called Hot. And it is like the entire, it's like he took the recording of Fame, the music bed, and just wrote a new set of lyrics over it. But it's all live music. It's all played by musicians. So they really take every element of Fame. It's so recognizable. I mean, to the point where in a modern setting, I think it might have gone into a lawsuit. I mean, it's that exact. But it's a really cool, really funky song. So go check that out. He also says, talking of spiritual cover versions of Bowie songs, Blur's M.O.R. anyone? And I agree with that one too. I hadn't thought about it, but it definitely has a very cool, like mid-70s Bowie vibe to it. And finally, the band Shearwater covered the entirety of the Lodger album and did a fine job with it. And I am so glad he mentioned that, because I had planned to bring that up in our show about our favorite Bowie covers. And I could not for the life of me remember the name of the band that had done that cover of Lodger, and they're called Shearwater. Look it up on YouTube. It is fantastic. It is basically a live in studio performance of the entire Lodger album, and it is so great. A good buddy of mine named Jeff Tyson, who is the bass player in the David Bowie tribute band that I play in, he said John Cale's orchestral version of the song Valentine's Day from Bowie's album The Next Day, not a song I'd feel comfortable covering myself because of the subject matter, but a wonderful bit of song crafting by Bowie nonetheless. And he's absolutely right. That John Cale version is really, really weird. It's kind of like a really nebulous sort of avant-garde orchestral version of it, but it's a great song. And John Cale does a really cool vocal on it. And then lastly, a good friend of mine named Don Cleese wrote in to say, This is going to be very obscure, but the Black Star Symphony that was performed at the Kennedy Center in D.C. last year by Donnie McCaslin and others who worked with Bowie included a lovely rendition of Dollar Days sung by John Cameron Mitchell, who, if you don't know the name, was the writer, director, and star of the 2001 film Hedwig and the Angry Inch. Mitchell also sang Where Are We Now? The evening ended with Rebel Rebel, led by Gail Ann Dorsey. So that's really awesome.
I'm
Thank you
seeing
all.
that in a couple of weeks. I'm super excited.
And when I saw that from in Don's email, I thought, I bet that's the thing that Rob's going to.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool.
Oh,
I
so
can't wait to
excited.
hear about that.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
So thank you all for writing in and talking about our most recent episodes. We really appreciate it. All right. So we're going to talk about this new documentary. It's called Ladies and Gentlemen, 50 Years of SNL Music. And, we're in a really good time right now. This is the 50th anniversary year for SNL. And we've gotten this 4-episode, really deep dive documentary series about the making of the show. One on the perspective of the cast, one from the writers, one from basically focusing on season 11, and one completely and totally about the cowbell sketch. But then there's this second standalone documentary film. It's a little over 2 hours, and it's all about SNL's history of music, both their musical performances and their musical characters and musical skits that they've done over the years. And we both watched that, and as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh my God, Rob and I have got to do an episode about this documentary because it is so great. So what'd you think about it, Rob?
A couple things. First, I loved it. It reminded me that I saw much more of this than I thought I had, over the years, because I kind of have lost track of how many people were on SNL. And the other thing I loved is, when SNL premiered, I was like 7. So a lot of this is stuff that I never saw or heard about, but just never, it doesn't get repeated often or whatever. So for me, it was also like this really cool deep dive into like great American musical history too, right? For example, that Al Green, that little clip with Al Green playing, I'm like, that is amazing. The clip with James Brown from 1980, that was amazing too. I don't remember that at all. I remember the Eddie Murphy sketch, but I don't remember James Brown being on. So there's a lot of that stuff that's really cool. And just I love the behind the scenes stuff. That stuff just wows me. So I really love how they lifted the veil from that.
I agree. I think that seeing rehearsal footage and seeing backstage somebody waiting for their cue to walk on stage, just little things like that, just really, I am such a SNL aficionado that if you want to show me a clip of Fred Armisen sitting in his office eating lunch, I will watch it because I just want to see every single thing that is available to be seen about this great show that I started watching SNL in season 2. Wow. Okay. Season 2. And that's because I'm really old, but I was all my friends started talking about this show and I was like, I have to see this show. So between seeing new episodes as they came out and reruns from the first season, I quickly caught up on, from that point on. And then I've been a regular viewer off and on, mostly on, for the remainder of those 50 years. So,
wow.
And of course, being the music head that I am, God, looking back on the 70s, especially the first 5 seasons of that show from 75 to 80, when Lorne Michaels was still on, he was producer then, he was off for 5 years and then was producer for the rest of the time. But during those first 5 years, the show was so weird. You would never be able to pin down any kind of musical aesthetic by watching these episodes because they would have anybody on. And just the craziest things that you have never heard of. And I wasn't old enough to really appreciate a lot of that stuff at the time, but the musical education that I got from that show in those first 5 years is astounding. Luckily, those complete episodes have been available on DVD for many years. So you can go back and rewatch all those things and see stuff, just all these incredible, weird, like Miles Davis. That Miles Davis performance is just bizarre. And I did not like it at the time. I appreciate now that I got the opportunity to see that. But at the time, I was like, what is this shit?
And I think, too, it represents sort of the chaos of New York in the 70s, right? New York was this like musical hotbed in the 70s and early 80s of just like stuff that was just throw anything at a wall. So that's sort of like the musical legacy of it, too, is it's sort of representative of both the times that it's in, which it does also in the comedy, and also of the music of the time. It is a soundscape of the times that it is using humor as a filter and a funnel for as well, which I think is really captivating. For me, I came into it, probably much later than you did. And it was a great way to discover artists as well. I know we just talked about the Pretenders, for example. I discovered the Pretenders by finding the Elvis Costello episode that was on SNL. And somebody said, oh, if you liked Elvis Costello, you should check out the Pretenders. They're kind of similar, right? So like it started off all these intangent kind of things, right? Like, oh, if you like the B-52s, here's Talking Heads, stuff like that, right? So it opened these musical doorways,
right,
for me. I mean, I had no idea who Joe Cocker was. I just knew the Belushi skit was really funny, right? The Blues Brothers, like the Blues Brothers in itself is a whole cultural triumph. And having Ray Charles on was a cultural triumph. Just all the stuff that they had on. But looking at that time frame, when I was really watching it a lot, most of my musical tastes at that time were sort of turning towards indie rock or American college radio, stuff like that, or punk, right? The advent of hip hop was like a huge thing. Most of my knowledge of hip hop and where I discovered it was through SNL. It was kind of like it's still my template now for what is the great or interesting new music that's out there that I may not necessarily like, but at least I've seen it. Like the first place I heard Chris Stapleton was on Saturday Night Live, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So it's always been that, but especially for me, sort of developing my musical chops as a fan, SNL was like huge for hip hop. Right. I don't know what hip hop is. Explain it to me. And nobody had to tell me. I just saw it on SNL.
One of my favorite parts of this film, and I should say that this film is a Questlove film, and that gives me the opportunity to once again say how fucking great Summer of Soul was, which came out a couple of years ago, which was a Questlove thing, and this is just as good. This is a really, really well-made film. And one of my favorite things in the film was it's tracing SNL's connection to hip-hop from the very modern, recent performances all the way back. And it shows clips going back in time, all the way back to the very first rap group, which performed on SNL, which was Funky 4 plus one more. And I didn't know this, but apparently that was the first rap performance on national television, period.
Which
that's
I never
amazing.
Knew. Yeah, I didn't know that either. And then they got Debbie Harry to put them on, which was even cooler, right? It's like, oh wow, Yeah, it was. The other cool thing was hearing the comedians talk about the bands, the people that are on SNL, right? We know they do the skits. I really like Bill Hader talking about like when them Crooked Vultures were on. He's like, I'm playing bass next to Dave Grohl, So it's really, for me, it's cool to see these guys are just as much fans as they are. Or when they're talking about when Devo was on, right? It's like these people are just as jazzed about the musicians coming on as we are. And that's really cool. And I've always thought that the music and the comedy was linked. I mean, obviously it is. But this really cements that line in so many ways I never thought of before, that it's fantastic.
The thing that you're saying about hearing the cast members talk about the music, I enjoyed hearing them talk about the music that they witnessed when they were on the show, when they're in studio and the first time, they hear Adele sing, or the first time that they see Nirvana play or anything like that. But I also really loved hearing them talk about before their time on the show, when they were just viewers, when they were kids, coming up watching the show and some of their memories of seeing, some of those early performances and how much that show meant to them just as a viewer, as a fan, and how much the music impacted them as a viewer too. And I love that. I mean, Fred Armisen is a true musician. He's a great drummer. He is super musical knowledgeable. And I just love the fact that these people had that connection to SNL even before they became cast members.
Yeah, and I think Fred's sort of like the biggest cheerleader for music that you could find that's probably been on the show, right?
Yeah, true.
Outside of maybe Belushi, right?
Yeah.
But I think that, especially, and I'm glad they talked about this as well, the Blues Brothers was such a moment.
God,
not just
yes,
for
it was.
SNL, but
Yeah.
it started on SNL and it just turned into this giant thing, right? And I think that is what made music in SNL like essential for anyone wanting to know new music, right?
Mhm.
I make it a point, like if I miss an episode and I go back and try to watch whatever, I at least want to watch the musicians just to learn something. First time I saw Chance the Rapper was on SNL. That was great. But then you could tell when they were closing out the show and he's out there talking, every cast member was like, I want to talk to this guy. So you feel that in this documentary. You feel stuff like that. You feel these guys are not just people in the cast and this is their work job, but they're like the same music fans that you and I are. And they are just giddy.
Right.
Bill Hader talking about Devo, was really cool. And just when they do this, when they talk about the formation of the sketches and things too, it's really fascinating. And I really like the stuff about Adam Sandler talking about playing the guitar.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And just because I never really thought much about, how did the Hanukkah song or the Thanksgiving song come together, right? I've never thought about that. And now I'm like, this is really cool.
Right.
And I forgot that there were so many skits that he did with music. I forgot about the skit that he did with Farley, which I remember seeing, but I forgot about it. And it is just this deeply rooted part of our musical cultural legacy, right? It's just fantastic. And it's also really cool to relive these moments. I love too when they did the intro where they put the two performances of artists side by side.
I was just gonna bring that up. The first 7 minutes of this film is basically a long music video. Then it's all a mashup of all these different performers from over the 50 years. And it'll take 2 or 3 artists that are completely different genres and just mash them together with a beat. And it is incredibly well done. I mean, if you just released that first 7 minutes, that tells you everything about SNL's history with music. And then the rest of the documentary, the next 2 hours, is just gravy that explains all of it. But that first 7 minutes tells you everything. It is so incredibly well done. And I want to know who it was who sat down and reviewed. First of all, I want to go to the SNL vault and I just want to look at every fucking episode they've ever done and relive all that stuff because, a lot of that stuff you can't see anymore. But who sat down and figured out that first 7 minutes? Who said, I should, match up New Kids on the Block with, whatever this other song is and use the beat from this one song and put the lyrics from this other song on top of it. And it was incredibly well done.
My guess is that, Questlove said that he watched every episode of SNL for this, right?
I can't even imagine how long that took and when he had to start working on that.
And then I'm guessing that he got the idea of like, okay, there's musical software that does these types of mashups. And I'm guessing it started with listening to it and doing the mashup. And then they added the video component. That is my guess. I don't know if that's a Questlove thing or not, but
it's got to be because, that man is a freaking genius. Yeah. And that really man is a music encyclopedia. He is so smart and he just knows his music history. And I feel like that is 100% him.
And I think that it's done with such a reverence that, it's Saturday Night Live. So we don't think of everybody looking at it sort of through this lens of, reverence, right? It's a lot of people see it as just like disposable comedy that they do on a Saturday night, and they sort of dismiss the cultural relevance of the show. But nobody's ever really examined in a film the musical legacy of Saturday Night Live, and this did that, and it did it justice. And to his credit, that's not an easy thing to do because there is so much, right? I mean, and I can only imagine, like one of the great lores of Saturday Night Live is, they were like, hey, if the Beatles are watching, come down and play. And I've always wondered, like, what if that actually happened? Can you imagine what Saturday Night Live would be like if the Beatles actually showed up and played?
You're right.
Or what would Saturday Night Live be like if Nirvana went back again? Just like there's lots of these other things. I really like Jack White's commentary about Saturday Night Live stuff from a musician standpoint.
I'll tell you, I'd forgotten how many times he had been on the show.
Yes.
And every time they showed a clip, it was from a different performance. And I was like, my God, how many times has this guy been on the show? But he's so good. And I loved him having that history with the show, that he could talk about so many different things over that period of time.
He's almost like the perfect bookend with Questlove,
him and Paul Simon.
Yeah.
Simon had done a bunch of appearances.
I remember some of the Paul Simon one from when Graceland came out.
Oh my God.
And I just remembered that's the first time I discovered the Graceland album was through him on SNL.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, wow, this is amazing. I still think the most bizarre thing I've ever seen on SNL that I love is Klaus Nomi. It's just like you were right. They had so much just blatantly weird stuff on Saturday Night Live that it's fantastic. And this doesn't hold back. You get, your classic rock, you get your hip hop, you get your indie and your punk and stuff, but there's no rhyme or reason to it. It's just, it sort of comes.
I mean, what other show is going to put Philip Glass as their musical guest? That's insane. That is insane. And, we were talking about the early 70s, the first 5 years. There are people like Gil Scott-Heron that I had no clue about at the time. And I just thought, this is bizarre and I don't get it. I really appreciate the fact that I was introduced to Gil Scott-Heron at that time. I had no understanding or no appreciation of it when I was that age.
Yeah.
But I've come to know more about him since then. And the fact that they put him on the air is just amazing.
Yeah. Even Sinead at the time, like, I don't think people now really realize just they put Sinead O'Connor on TV, right? And even putting Nirvana on, they put Nirvana on.
Nirvana they were just starting to hit.
Yeah.
Right.
So they were just on the fringe enough to be interesting, but they hadn't really exploded yet. And I thought that was kind of a fascinating, moment them too. You're like, okay, this is their coming out party in many ways, I forgot about Philip Glass.
Right.
Yes, hello. Let's talk about the Flopcast.
Every week we give podcast listeners a chance to come and join us in Chickentown,
where we talk about Saturday morning cartoons, comics and science fiction conventions, music and concert reports, 70s and 80s pop culture, and for no good reason, chickens.
Boy, we're weird.
Oh, we are ridiculous.
We're proud members of the ESO Network, and you can find us at flopcast.net.
So one of the things that I really liked about this film a lot is that anytime you talk about SNL music or anytime you talk about the history of the show, every single time there are things that come up. There's the Sinead O'Connor thing and Fear and the Ashlee Simpson debacle and Elvis Costello and Kanye. There's these things that always get talked about. Like, these are the sort of the iconic moments that you always tell when you're talking about the history of SNL. But they were done in new ways, I think, for this film, with a lot of additional context given. And I really, because, every time you see a clip of that Sinead thing where she rips up the picture of the Pope, I mean, that is a shocking moment, but it loses its impact because of the number of times it's been replayed and the number of times it's been talked about. And I really felt like they did new things with each one of those highlights in this thing. Like they did a fairly lengthy interview with Lee Ving, the lead singer of Fear, talking about that time that they were on the show. And they had the guy who was the music producer on the show talking about the Fear performance. And that was new information for me. I thought that was really, really cool. I also loved hearing the recordings of like the people, the directors and stuff in the booth.
Yeah.
As Ashlee Simpson is melting down on live television, and they're like, what do we do? She should be singing. What do we do? Do we go to a bumper? Do we cut? She's leaving the stage. Yeah, I thought that was absolutely fascinating.
I thought that was cool. And, they talked to Howard Shore, which I thought was cool.
I know.
And I forgot.
I know.
Because there's just so much in 50 years of SNL that, I don't remember this like a book like you do. But the Howard Shore stuff was really cool.
That was really cool.
I'm like, okay, this is awesome. And I love the little close-ups to like the house band and showing them play and stuff. And I'm like, this is cool. For me too, the other thing is like, as you and I get older, we are not down with the kids in the way that we used to be, but being able to see like Chappell Roan or Adele or Sabrina Carpenter or any of these people now, or, Sia, you don't really know who any of these folks are necessarily. But now you can kind of get a template of what contemporary America is being moved by musically. For me, listening to contemporary artists like this really helps me sort of be engaged with what the current trends of pop stuff are, because there is literally so much music now, you can't track it down. So this is kind of like, oh, I should hear this, or oh, I should hear that. And that's the SNL has always been like that. You've always been like, I may not like this, but I should at least listen to it. And this is like the underlining of that for me, which I thought was fantastic. Like I remember when I saw the Yeah Yeah Yeahs on Saturday Night Live, kind of how I got introduced on them, and tons of other artists like that. The Arcade Fire, when they were on SNL, was great too, right? And there's a lot of these moments where like, this is what is going to be driving music or radio or whatever for the next 10 or 15 or 20 months, and just the way that they pick it out and have the people on is fascinating. And hearing the stories of, like you said, the behind the scenes, like in the booth talking about that stuff. I'm like, I don't even think about that when I'm watching it, but now I do.
We're recording this on February 2nd, and in just a couple of weeks, we're going to be having the SNL 50th anniversary special. It's a 3-hour thing that's going to be on a Sunday evening. And a couple of days before that, there is a homecoming concert at Radio City Music Hall. Yeah. And the lineup for this performance is people who were on the show throughout the entire 50 years. I mean, the history of SNL is going to be represented in this concert. So here's the list in vaguely alphabetical order: Arcade Fire, Backstreet Boys, Bad Bunny, Bonnie Raitt, Brandy Carlisle, Brittany Howard, Chris Martin, David Byrne, Devo, Eddie Vedder, Jack White, of course, Jack White, Jelly Roll, Lady Gaga, Mumford & Sons, Post Malone, the Preservation Hall Jazz Band. I'm so excited that they're going to be on this. Robin, the B-52s, and the Roots. I want to go to this thing so badly.
And they're going to have surprises.
Oh, yeah, Like, first of all, how do they not have Paul Simon on this thing? Maybe he just didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
But he and Lorne are best friends, and he is so hugely important in that first decade of SNL particularly. But anyway, I mean, it's fine, but I'm really excited about this show and about all these artists that are going to be on it. I think this is going to be a hell of a time.
Yeah, there's a lot there, and and it's convenient because, B-52s are retiring and Arcade Fire has a new album coming out. So it's perfect, right? And Devo, I'm just being able to see Devo right now, kids. This is going to be your last chance to see Devo in the B-52s. So friggin' go.
So the the Radio City Music Hall concert is going to be streamed on Peacock on February 14th, and then the 50th anniversary special is going to be streamed on. It happens on the 16th. So that's a couple of good nights of television right there. Oh, I am excited.
Yeah. I love the interviews with Eddie Murphy. I thought Eddie Murphy gave a lot of really interesting interview stuff there.
Yeah.
Really good. Yeah.
I was surprised at some of the cast members that they did get to do this, and Eddie's one of them. I wish they had used more of whatever conversation they had with Jane Curtin. But her bits were good, but the Eddie Murphy stuff I really loved.
I loved that. Yeah. I thought that was great. And I thought the Bill Hader stuff was good too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just sort of really think they picked the right, and Maya Rudolph gave some interesting stuff too, which I thought, I
adore her. Yeah. And I was glad that they had Justin Timberlake in it because, as a host and as a performer, there was this whole period where he was so iconic on SNL, and hearing him talk about some of the things that they did and some of the performances that had, like the Beyonce skit that they did where they're playing the backup dancers for her was so good. And I just loved that they were able to get him on this.
Mm-hmm. And, hearing Andy Samberg talk about it, and Adam Sandler, we talked about this before, but the Adam Sandler stuff was great.
Yep.
And I just thought, whoever organized the SNL people they got to talk did a really good job of it. They got really insightful people, talking about it. Even the stuff with Fred Armisen was really good because he could go on forever.
Oh God.
And just the way they clipped that out really worked. Totally.
All right. Well, I guess that's it. We just wanted to jump on and do a really quick conversation about this documentary because it was phenomenal.
It was fantastic.
Yeah. God, it was so good. And it wasn't strictly chronological. Some of it was done thematically. And I just thought everything about it was so well done. So another big win for Questlove.
Yes.
Man, I just fucking love that guy.
Yeah. If you're listening to this, by all means, call us. And
come on, man. We'll have you on our show. We'd love that.
Yeah.
I mean, we would spend a whole hour just telling you how amazing you are. So, you can't turn that down. Oh, man. All right. Well, I guess that's a good place to cut. So if you're listening to this and you have seen the SNL music documentary, drop us a line and let us know what you thought about it. Tell us your favorite SNL music moment. Tell us what you thought about the documentary itself. We would love to hear from you. You can drop us a note at modernmusicology1@gmail.com, or you can leave a note on our socials wherever you find this episode posted. We are going to be back next week. We are going to be talking with author and editor Chris Coker. And he has a new book out that is called Thank You for the Days. Fans of the Kinks share 60 years of stories. And we have read this book and are super looking forward to talking to him about this. It's going to be really, really great. I kind of know Chris. He's a bit of a buddy of mine, and I know he's going to be a fantastic guest. So definitely tune in for that. And then on February 23rd, we are going to be going live to do a show talking about our favorite album covers. Each one of us have made picks of some album cover art that we want to highlight and talk about. And we're going to be doing a little live show. So make sure you join us for that and chime in with your comments or questions or suggestions of what album covers you love. So, Rob, thanks for doing this with me.
No, this was awesome.
My God, I should just start an SNL podcast.
Yes, you should.
A, because I need another podcast.
Yes.
Incorrect. But B, I can just go on for hours about SNL. I love it so much. You know what? Maybe I'll think about that. My partner will be so angry with me if I start another podcast.
I know that feeling.
Oh boy, I'm telling you.
Yeah.
All right. So everybody join us next week when we talk to Chris Coker. And until then, have a great week. Keep rocking on and let us know what you thought about the SNL documentary. Have a great week.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.